From the Cronkite studios in downtown Phoenix, this is Cronkite News.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Melanie Porter. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we take a look at the top stories from our Washington, D.C. bureau, from the Supreme Court taking on DACA to a proposed ban on mining at the Grand Canyon.
Washington has been consumed this week by the impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump, but Democrats today asked if the president broke another law by deploying troops to the U.S.-Mexico border.
Cronkite News reporter Brian Peach has the story live from our Washington bureau.
It's been a year and a half since President Trump first sent troops to the U.S.-Mexico border, but Democrats are still asking if using the military for what they say are political motivations is illegal.
You know, make no mistake, this decision by Trump to deploy troops to the border was not only alarming, it was unnecessary and raised serious legal questions that the administration has refused to answer.
Representative Raul Grijalva of Tucson was one of more than 30 House Democrats who called on the Pentagon's internal watchdog to investigate the ongoing deployment of troops to the border. They say it could violate an 1878 law that bans the use of the military for domestic enforcement without an okay from Congress.
We're saying you violated this law, and you are now mixing domestic enforcement of the law and asking the military to do that.
While Democrats say the president is using troops as political pawns ahead of next year's election, supporters say the president is just keeping promises he made in the last election. Representative Paul Gosar of Prescott said in a statement that the president promised the American people he would secure our borders and that the priority should be securing our own country before trying to secure others. The deployments began last April with National Guard troops, a move supported by Arizona Governor Doug Ducey. Active duty soldiers were added last fall. Representative Judy Chu of California said the president needs to be held accountable.
He is not above the rule of law, and we certainly cannot allow him to break the law in order to promote a dangerous and racist agenda.
Critics say those deployments not only hurt communities along the border, but bring down the morale of the troops who were trained for military operations overseas, not at home on the U.S. border.
And this is not the first time that Grijalva has complained about troops at the U.S.-Mexico border. He wrote to Ducey in April 2018, arguing against the deployment. We reached out to the White House and the Defense Department for comment. The Pentagon said only that the letter is under consideration. In Washington, Brian Peach, Cronkite News.
President Donald Trump today presented White House honors to the police and civilians responded to mass shootings last month in El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio. But elsewhere in Washington, elected officials were demanding more action in response to shootings. Action on gun control. Hannah Ehrlich has the story from Washington.
Congress left town on its summer recess 5 weeks ago. 5 weeks during which 38 people were killed in 3 separate shootings in Texas and Ohio. Congress is back today, and an Arizona mayor was among those who were here to push the Senate to act on gun control legislation.
Mesa Mayor John Giles was one of almost 300 mayors last month who asked the Senate to come back from recess and vote on gun legislation. Senators stayed away, but now that they're back, Giles said it's time for them to act.
It's a real opportunity for the Senate to do something, unlike, the last several years. So I hope that they'll take this up as an opportunity to show the American people that they're listening and that they're relevant and that they are going to respond to problems.
He joined other mayors urging Senate action on a House bill that would expand background checks on gun buyers. That bill passed the House more than 6 months ago, but has stalled in the Senate. But even in the wake of last month's shootings, one expert said Senate action is not a given.
Well, gun control legislation is certainly something that's been getting a lot more attention these days in the wake of a number of tragedies that we've had recently. But it is important to keep in mind it's kind of a perennial subject of interest. So there'll be a tragedy, a mass shooting, and there'll be this kind of surge in attention for gun control issues, and then oftentimes it just sort of fades. So the question is, I think, whether this time it's really going to stick and whether we're going to see actual movement in the legislatures and perhaps even the Congress, and if so, what that's going to look like.
Neely thinks any gun control measure could be a tough sell in a state like Arizona.
My guess would be that in a place like Arizona, people will see a history of relatively lax gun regulation that has not had any measurable effect on gun deaths or gun violence, whether increasing or decreasing them. And I think it'll be very difficult to convince people in Arizona that they should have more gun regulation.
But Giles thinks voters have already made up their minds.
The public is very aware of this issue already. I don't think we need to do a whole lot to educate the public. I think, frankly, the leaders of our country and of our communities need to catch up to where the public is on this issue right now.
He says it's official Washington that needs convincing, which is why he is here today.
Particularly Senator McSally is in a crucial position on this vote, so I'm looking forward to talking with her about it. I think it's important that she hear from the rest of the state as well, though. So she needs our support, so I'd encourage people to join me in lobbying Senator McSally to be supportive of this legislation.
Giles was scheduled to join other mayors at a meeting with White House officials today. And he said he plans to meet with Arizona Senators Kyrsten Sinema and Martha McSally on the issue tomorrow. In Washington, Hannah Ehrlich, Cronkite News.
It's been more than 2 years since the Trump administration said it would end DACA, the deferred deportation program that protects immigrants who were brought to this country illegally as children.
That move was blocked by courts, and today the Supreme Court was asked to decide which side is right, as Hannah Ehrlich reports from our Washington bureau.
More than 660,000 people are currently protected by DACA, and several hundred of them rallied outside the Supreme Court today on a cold and rainy day to speak out in defense of the program they say has let them come out of the shadows.
DACA recipient Eddie Chavez said he came from Phoenix and camped out so he could be here for today's arguments in the Supreme Court.
A lot of us have been here for days camping, standing up in solidarity for all of the DACA recipients. Currently right now in the Supreme Court, DACA hearings are happening. We have a lot of our community members who are actually inside right now, and we're just here to show support and not show fear.
The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals was created in 2012 under President Barack Obama. Besides protecting some young immigrants from deportation, it granted some rights, including the ability to get a work permit or a driver's license.
We want to have the privilege to work, the privilege to go to school. In Arizona, we don't have in-state tuition, but we can probably get it back at some point. We fought for it before, and we got it before.
But the Trump administration in 2017 said it would end the program, arguing that it was created illegally by the Obama administration. Lower courts kept DACA alive, saying the Trump administration acted improperly when it moved to end the program. Today's hearing was just another step in a long process for DACA recipients like Rodrigo Pimentel.
For so long, our futures have been so uncertain, living from court case to court case, and today the Supreme Court they're hearing oral arguments pertaining to DACA.
Inside the court, the justices seem focused on whether DACA was created legally in the first place. The possibility that the court could allow the Trump administration to end the program has people like Hernandez feeling that DACA recipients like him are unwanted.
For what reason? Well, I don't know. We can get into that. But for us, it just feels like we're not wanted no matter who we are, what we do. It's just our concept, us being here present, is what they have a problem with.
For many DACA recipients growing up in the U.S., this is the only country they have ever known. Chavez said it shouldn't be so hard for them to be accepted as the Americans he feels they are.
We are your neighbors, we are your community members, we are your friends. We contribute day to day to being American. It seems to me that we do everything we can to be Americans, but America doesn't want us to be Americans right now.
Ending DACA was one of President Donald Trump's priorities, and while the court heard arguments in the case today, a decision is not likely until sometime next spring or early summer, just as the 2020 presidential election is heating up. In Washington, Hannah Ehrlich, Cronkite News.
Republicans in Congress are usually backing President Donald Trump, but this week they're pushing back against the president's sudden decision to pull U.S. troops out of Syria. And Senator Martha McSally is one of those who says it's a bad idea. Cronkite News reporter Heather Cumberledge has more on that story from our Washington bureau.
A bad idea, McSally says, because pulling U.S. troops out of Syria abandons Kurdish fighters, who are our allies against ISIS, and leaves them vulnerable to attack by their long-term adversaries, the Turks.
We cannot tolerate a NATO ally now coming in and mowing them down. That is just not the right message, and it's not good for the safety of America, so I really hope it's reconsidered.
McSally's statement Tuesday put her in line with Arizona Democratic Senator Kyrsten Sinema, who said it would ultimately endanger the U.S. In a statement earlier this week, Sinema said, "Abandoning our partners in the war on the Islamic State will only jeopardize America's security, strengthen Iran and Russia, and put our allies at greater risk." But Trump defended the move, saying ISIS has been defeated and that U.S. troops cannot keep fighting an endless war in the Middle East.
Our military has never been stronger, but we're now acting as police. We're policing areas. We're doing jobs that other countries should be doing. We're doing jobs, frankly, that Europe should be doing. We're doing jobs that Russia should be doing, that Iran should be doing, that Iraq, Turkey, Syria should be doing. They should be doing this. We shouldn't be doing it. We're 7,000 miles away.
A growing number of Republicans say we should be there. 68 senators voted in January to keep troops in Syria, saying withdrawal would risk hard-won gains. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, normally a staunch defender of Trump, called the withdrawal a big win for ISIS. Despite Trump's threat to destroy Turkey's economy if it attacked the Kurds in northern Syria, that's just what Turkish forces did yesterday. That was no surprise to Sanam Mohammed, a Kurdish member of the Syrian Democratic Council.
The Turkish government wanted the war. They didn't want peace. They only know the language of war.
Graham is backing a measure to impose sanctions on Turkey unless it pulls back, and at least 10 Senate Republicans have gone on the record against the troop withdrawal.
Turkey needs to be deterred. Erdogan needs to change his course right now, and I think we need to stand with the Kurds.
In Washington, Heather Cumberledge, Cronkite News.
On the House side, not everyone in Arizona's delegation has weighed in, but those who have are giving more predictably partisan responses, with Republican Andy Biggs and Paul Gosar supporting withdrawal, Democrats Greg Stanton, Ruben Gallego, and Raul Grijalva criticizing it.
When the first iPhones came out in 2007, the North American Free Trade Agreement was already 13 years old. And while the iPhone has had countless updates since then, NAFTA has remained the same. Business and government officials are saying it is past time for a trade update, as Hannah Ehrlich reports from our Washington Bureau. Hannah?
Among officials calling for a deal are Arizona Governor Doug Ducey and Arizona Chamber of Commerce President Glenn Hammer. They were in Washington today to push for NAFTA's replacement, the United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, an update Ducey says is long overdue.
Ducey says finalizing the so-called USMCA agreement would bring jobs and billions of dollars in trade to the state.
This results in 228,000 jobs for the state of Arizona, over $20 billion in cross-border trade.
Mexico has long been Arizona's #1 foreign trading partner, and today Ducey said that it recently moved past China to become the #1 trading partner for the U.S. But before the USMCA deal can be finalized, it has to get through Congress, where Democrats have raised concerns about enforcement of environmental and labor protections under the deal, among other issues. Ducey says he doesn't know anyone who is flatly opposed to the agreement, but believes there are some politics at play.
Because it would be a failure of Congress to act on something that's in front of them. And I'd say that Congress should demonstrate a greater love for our country than they have for a love of political party.
President Trump and his administration have been pushing for the deal, with Vice President Mike Pence scheduled to hold a meeting on it today. Ducey said he thinks all sides can benefit from the deal if it is approved.
Martha Barcina, who is Mexico's ambassador to the United States, came to Arizona last year and said at a sold-out standing room only luncheon that if you care about Mexico, you'll be a yes on USMCA. I'd amplify that and say if you care about Arizona and the jobs in Arizona, you'll be yes on USMCA.
The Mexican Senate gave overwhelming approval to the USMCA in June, but Canada has not acted on the deal, with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying he wanted to wait for the U.S. to act. But now, Canadian national elections are scheduled for next month. In Washington, Hannah Ehrlich, Cronkite News.
The House last night approved a bill that will permanently ban mining, specifically uranium mining, on more than 1 million acres around the Grand Canyon. While the fight in the House may be over, the fight about the bill is far from over, as Heather Cumberledge reports from our Washington bureau.
The Grand Canyon Centennial Protection Act passed the House by a comfortable 236 to 185 margin last night. But by this morning, the road to final passage looked a lot rockier.
Nowhere. This bill's going nowhere. You know, this is something that the House has been trying to push. It's been the anti-campaign of the chairman trying to get rid of all mining.
The bill still has to get through the Senate. Then it would have to be signed by the president. But the White House said this week it would recommend a veto of such a bill. Supporters say the bill is worth fighting for.
There are some areas like the Grand Canyon, like it or not, that have to be left alone.
That was echoed by Representative Tom O'Halloran, whose district includes part of the Grand Canyon.
This legislation does more than just preserve the canyon for the enjoyment of future generations. It protects our water supply, the health of Arizonans, and our state's tourism economy.
Grijalva says area tribes, including the Navajo and Hualapai, would face increased health and safety risks if mining continues. But Gosar accused Grijalva of using tribes in the canyon as a cover for his ultimate goal, to try and cripple America's mining industry.
What this really is a vehement grabbing of public lands. There's breccia pipes here, there's rare earths, there's all sorts of different minerals here.
It's because of that, Grijalva said, that mining companies have been given free rein for too long.
People have to look at the legacy here, and if mining should occur, and it should occur under 21st century criteria, public participation, transparency, and pay your way in terms of paying royalties like gas and oil pay.
While they disagree on the bill, all lawmakers agree that the canyon needs to be protected. 6 million people visit the Grand Canyon per year, adding more than $1 billion a year to the state's economy. That's why Representative Greg Stanton said he supported the bill.
It's good for the environment, it's good for the canyon itself, it's good for economic development.
In Washington, Heather Cumberledge, Cronkite News.
While the bill has a long way to go before it becomes law, the mining ban doesn't. The Obama administration imposed a ban on uranium mining in 2012 that is still in place today. If it is not overturned, the ban will be in effect until 2032.
House Democrats and Republicans who are debating the future of the Endangered Species Act don't agree on much. And this week, they couldn't even agree on where to debate the issue. Cronkite News reporter Hannah Ehrlich has that story from our Washington, D.C. bureau.
While the House Natural Resources Committee considered 10 Democratic bills they said would strengthen protections for endangered species, committee Republicans held a competing hearing of their own in a separate building where they unveiled 19 GOP proposals. Arizona Representative Paul Gosar said the Republican measures would take decision-making away from Washington and put it in local hands.
This is something that I think that both sides can get behind to get a win, you know, and when local communities, when the environment, when the endangered species all win, I think that's something that if we can give credit to everyone, maybe at some way we can turn this partisan gridlock to a success story.
But environmental advocates said the GOP bills would be anything but a success story for endangered species. They said the bills would merely cement Trump administration moves to roll back protections under the act.
Our understanding is that they're unveiling a package of bills today that we think would undermine the Endangered Species Act, just as the Trump administration's regulatory rollbacks do.
The Democrats' bill, on the other hand, would reverse many of those rollbacks. No action was taken on the proposals yesterday, a day consumed by talk of impeachment proceedings on Capitol Hill. Arizona Representative Debbie Lesko called the competing hearings a sign of the times.
Fortunately, it is so politically polarized right now. In fact, today we just heard that they're probably going to do an impeachment inquiry to the president, and there's no reason for it. They have no grounds, just like the Russia collusion. They had no grounds, and so this is going to flop too.
In Washington, Hannah Ehrlich, Cronkite News.
The Trump administration's changes to the Endangered Species Act are scheduled to take effect today, and they will streamline the way species are added and removed from the list and will limit how critical habitat is determined for those species. Changes that are good or bad for the act, depending on who's talking.
America is a technology leader, but that's not by accident. That was the message university officials brought to a Senate committee this week, urging lawmakers to continue funding research so the U.S. can keep the edge. Cronkite News reporter Brian Peach has a story from our Washington bureau.
Ask Arizona State University's Chief Research and Innovation Officer about the benefits of research at the university, and he can start running through the list.
For example, the Ebola vaccine, the work started at ASU. We also did work on the Zika virus. So we're also working on some pioneering technologies for protecting the cyberspace.
Panchanathan was one of a handful of university officials from around the country who were on Capitol Hill recently to tell lawmakers about the importance of such research and the need to support it with federal funding. The officials from Arizona, Mississippi, and Wisconsin told senators not to take those advancements for granted, citing challenges that face research and innovation in the United States, such as China's push to innovate.
I am confident that if we can address some of these priorities, we will continue to be in the vanguard of global competitiveness and economic prosperity.
Panchanathan, head of ASU's Knowledge Enterprise, told lawmakers that federal investments in science and engineering education have allowed the U.S. to lead in research. Diane Suvane, chair of the National Science Board, said that China has either surpassed or will soon surpass the U.S. in research and development spending. Panchanathan said federal funding would help keep the U.S. as a leader in research.
The United States has always been in the vanguard of competitiveness. So we want to not only maintain that, but we want to further leapfrog into the future.
Research advocates like Suvane said that staying at the front of the research pack helps protect the U.S. in an increasingly competitive world. She told lawmakers that the best way to lead the future is to invent it. In Washington, Brian Peach, Cronkite News.
Today is National Constitution and Citizenship Day. Governor Doug Ducey is celebrating by noting Arizona's leadership in making a citizenship test a requirement for graduation in Arizona high schools. Over 30 other states have passed similar laws since Arizona became the first to do so in 2015. But just because there's a test doesn't mean all Americans have learned the answers. Some had trouble coming up with any of the answers when we asked.
That's what Cronkite News reporter Hannah Ehrlich found when she took to the streets of Washington today to see just how well people know their civics.
The Constitution is enshrined here inside the National Archives in Washington. But outside the archives,
executive branch. Speaker of the House? No, that's not right either, is it? Executive branch. Help me out here.
David Hayes was one of several tourists I quizzed about the Constitution and other documents today on Constitution and Citizenship Day, the day 237 years ago when the Constitution was signed and sent to the states for ratification.
It created the national government. It gave it certain powers. It divided up those powers into the legislative branch, Congress, the executive branch, the president and other departments, and the judicial branch, the Supreme Court and such lower courts that Congress has created.
While Hayes struggled with the branches of government, some of the folks we stopped nailed it.
Who is in charge of the executive branch?
President.
Shapiro says knowing the Constitution is more than just a quiz game. It can help citizens protect their rights.
One way to cure what ails the body politic is to rebalance our powers, to observe the Constitution better, to read it, and to understand what it does and doesn't give the federal government, as opposed to the states or localities, the power to do.
Not all civic questions are so weighty, like naming the national anthem. You can name the national anthem, right?
I keep thinking, oh, kids say, can you see? But I don't think that's the title.
It is the Stars and Stripes. No, yeah. No, I don't know. We hear it at every hockey game.
Outside the National Archives, Hannah Ehrlich, Cronkite News.
They say bipartisanship is a lost art in Washington, but don't tell that to the members of Congress who suited up last night for charity, including one member from Arizona.
Cronkite News reporter Heather Cumberledge has the story from our Washington bureau.
There's a uniform on Capitol Hill. Suit, coat, white shirt, and power tie. But lawmakers last night ditched that uniform for this one, and they were ditching their ties for a good cause. It's the 21st annual Hoops for Charity event, started in 1999 to benefit inner city youth. The game was played at Gallaudet University, a school for the deaf. So it began with cheerleaders performing the national anthem in sign language. Then bipartisan members of Congress took the court against a team of lobbyists to raise money benefiting 4 local charities. This year's event raised just under $130,000.
Raised just over $3 million for all local DC kids, and so it's, all the money goes, 100% of the money we raise goes to the kids.
Miller said the kids aren't the only beneficiaries of this annual game.
Great group of bipartisan. We can show that Washington that we can get along when the cause is right.
That was echoed by Congressman Greg Stanton, the only Arizona lawmaker on the floor.
Tonight was a fun game for charity, but also it's meaningful because it brings Democrats and Republicans closer together.
But the peace and love didn't extend to the competition. The game got heated near the end. The game ended with the lobbyists winning 54-46. Despite the loss, Stanton is not ready to give up on his hoop dream. He had an appeal to Arizona State's basketball coach.
Yeah, and I want to make sure one thing's clear. Please show the video to Bobby Hurley. I've got 4 years of eligibility, so I can still play. Bobby, recruit me.
In Northeast Washington, Heather Cumberledge, Cronkite News.
That's it for this special edition of Cronkite News. Thank you for joining us. For top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.